This program is brought to you by Bible Way Media, overseen by the elders of the Chipman Road Church of Christ in Lee Summit, Missouri.
Know the account well. We all do. But, maybe you've been like me and just haven't paid attention to the question. The first question given in the account. And perhaps maybe one of the most important, I would argue, one, if not the most profound questions of David's whole life. A question that we probably just, read past, but served to be more than a question about identity. Something far more important, a question that should have stopped a horrible, sinful act. And the ironic thing is, we don't even know the questioner's name. So bring your mind with me to 2 Samuel chapter 11, when David's men are off in battle and David can't sleep, verses 2 and 3. It says, "And it came to pass in the evening that David arose from his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman. And one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Now we've heard this before, right? There's nothing new here. But notice the wording. David sent and inquired after the woman. David sent and inquired. That detail and those that follow tell us that David called, maybe several servants together to ask for this task and ask about her, to find out who she was. And remember, this was evening or eventide. That means dusk or nighttime. It was obviously a time, when people were getting ready for bed. It says that David arose from his bed. It was the end of the day. So there wouldn't have been a lot of action in the house. These servants may have been, merely house servants, not main advisors to David. Just someone who was on duty at the end of the day. A few who were to stick around and close the house down for the night when things were usually quiet. Nothing much going on. So most likely, these servants had very low responsibility, very little power. They were just, maybe a placeholder until morning, when the hustle and bustle of the day's business came to life, and they were no longer needed, and was off the night watch. And of that group that he brought together, it says that one spoke up. But he had no significance if it weren't for that very important question. Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Now let's pause for a moment and fill in the blanks here, the blanks for us, that is. This no-name servant knew who this woman was, knew her connection to David, and based on that question, I would argue he thought David did too. So for us, the details are, Eliam was Gilonite, a warrior of David. His name means God of the people, or God is kinsman. He was a warrior or a mighty man of David. We read about his name in 2 Samuel chapter 23 after David gives what's called his last song, or his last words in verses 1 through 7. And what follows those final words is a listing of names. Verse 8 says of the names of the mighty men whom David had. His soldiers that fought with him, that stood by him in his darkest hours. Eliam was the son of Ahithophel, the Gilonite. He's listed in verse 34. That was the first part of the question that one asked. The daughter of Eliam? That's what he asked David. Then the second part of the question came. The wife of Uriah the Hittite? Now we know Uriah was a loyal soldier for David, whose name means Jehovah is my light. Now if you know historically who the Hittites were from, Genesis chapter 26 verse 34 and chapter 7 verse 46, you know that they came from the family of Esau. and were not raised to worship God, except for Uriah. Somewhere along the way, Uriah took a Hebrew name and acknowledged God as his light. The Hittites were a tribe that was to be destroyed when the Israelites went into the promised land. Instead, Uriah was different. He was loyal, faithful to David and to God, so much that he became one of David's elite 37 mighty men of war, listed there in 2 Samuel chapter 23, verses 8 through 39, just like his father-in-law, Eliam. David would have known that when that one question was asked of him. David had fought alongside both of them, both of these men, mentioned in this one simple question, that they had risked their life for David's life. And in that one simple question, asked by the one with no name, that should have been brought to David's mind from one servant reminding David, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? But David didn't answer. We don't have an answer from David. And isn't that odd? Maybe he ignored him. Maybe he dismissed him. But we learn later that David knew exactly who she was. In verse 6 of chapter 11, it says that David knew exactly who she was when he charged Joab to send Uriah to his wife. He knew, maybe from that one who asked that question that David had to answer in his own mind. The one who put pieces together for him to see more clearly the sin that was sitting there, a warning in the form of a question that David knew the answer, and what the servant was pointing out. This is the daughter of a man who fought by your side, the wife of your soldier who has given his life for you many times over, and stood with you in your darkest hours while you ran from Saul, when no one else stood with you. But these men did. Her father, her husband. It was a question that was asked that David never answered. Yeah, I know, you've all heard the account. Maybe, I don't know, hundreds of times. And maybe we've even read that question and just kind of passed over it to the juicier parts, the confrontation between David and Nathan, or the grief of David lying on the ground after the death of his son. Or maybe we even wrestled ourselves with God's decision to allow the child to die. And that's what we focused on. And maybe like David, we ignored those servants. I don't know, as insignificant? No name servants, just nobodies. A small detail that God the Holy Spirit included for commentary maybe. And perhaps we ignored the servants like David did, as David didn't expect the servants to say anything important or to say anything in return. Just do their job. Just a yes, sir, or happy to help, sir, or of course, sir, we'll find that out. Even though all the while they knew who the woman was, and they knew David's motive. And knowing the significance of the king's request, knowing the consequences of what that question would bring, that servant, that one, he could have said nothing. He could have asked nothing. He could have questioned nothing. He could have just kept his mouth shut and did what the king asked, instead of reminding the king of who this was and what he was about to do. Yeah, this account, it doesn't seem like David, does it? A man after God's own heart. I mean, David had come a long way from when he was running for his life in 1 Samuel, a long way from the day when Abigail, another servant, reminded David of who he was and his role in the future of God's kingdom. That was a David that realized the sin that was before him and stopped. That David listened to a servant. Instead, this night, this David didn't. This David chose not to listen. to one simple, lowly servant whose name is not even written by God the Holy Spirit. This one servant who was summoned at night to do what he was told and asked a question that should have stopped a servant of God, a king, from a great sin that cost the life of his child, his opportunity to build the temple to his God, and allowed the enemies of the Lord to be blasphemed. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 14. It was just a question. It was just a question asked by one, while all of the others remained silent, who probably knew who David was referring to. Others who maybe were too afraid to speak up, perhaps like we are sometimes, afraid to ask, worried if we will stand out, if we'll get in trouble in some way, afraid to ask one question. But sometimes it only takes one question. Sometimes it only takes one servant. And the name doesn't matter. Just the question that can lead someone to another question and another, that will provide answers that will help them have an eternity of peace. Sometimes it takes just one. And it is for this that I bow my knees with you today, that we will be the one.
We thank you for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed this program. You can find out more about Bible Way Media by visiting us at biblewaymedia.org. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find all of our podcasts on all major podcast platforms. As always, we thank you for listening.